Do we ever really die? Yeah, our bodies do, but our connections, those that outlive it, do they keep us alive or do they keep us from living? I finally finished The Summer Hikaru Died when Yoshiki's best friend Hikaru dies on a mountain, then something wearing Hikaru's skin comes back. A being with no sense of self except a desire to be wanted as desperately as it craves human souls. Most series would make it about if this is really Hikaru, but there's zero ambiguity. Yoshiki saw his body, and though he's terrified of this Lovecraftian horror, Yoshiki believes himself a monster too, so the series makes this new Hikaru just as much a protagonist. Because when this being starts learning what it means to be human, and someone so afraid of themselves traps it in a dead boy's body, neither can be fully alive or allowed to die. But love isn't clinging, and when we refuse to let go, what we create isn't love at all. It's something undead. When I thought about this topic, the first thing that came to mind was Pet Sematary, Sometimes Dead is Better. The story warns when grief refuses to accept death and forces it back into life, we don't get our loved ones back. We get something undead. Something with a different sense of moral goodness that wears their face but can't be what we need it to be. Maybe it's Hikaru's golden retriever energy, but I couldn't help comparing Yoshiki's attachment to the new Hikaru like an owner trying to train a puppy who is a bit more interested in killing than in playing. So the connection stuck with me. First, let's get this out of the way. Yoshiki loved the old Hikaru, certainly not in a platonic way, but not in a requited way either. Old Hikaru was kind of girl crazy. He hated studying, was good at sports, could talk to anyone about anything except authority figures because of his brash way of speaking. Yoshiki describes him to the new Hikaru as being like the main character of a manga. He's clearly in love with the memory of his best friend and is torn between seeing the new Hikaru like its own person and as a comforting companion to the truth about himself that Yoshiki can't come out and say. In this way, he's not that different from the something that took over Hikaru's body, for there is a mountain upon which they were both stranded. Although Yoshiki has lived his entire life in a village, his mountain is a place where everyone knows everything, where people who are outed are called diseased, where his parents barely speak to each other, where people whisper loudly and give unsolicited advice about disciplining his younger sister who's afraid of going to school, a place Yoshiki describes as leaving him no room to breathe. This oppressive environment that we cannot escape is something a lot of us can sympathize with, which is why from the beginning the relationship between them is complicated. Essentially, Hikaru's death and new Hikaru coming down from the mountain allowed Yoshiki to escape his own. There's a saying in Japan, marry Shinto, die Buddhist. If you are unfamiliar, Shintoism is the indigenous religion in Japan, but Buddhism has also greatly influenced the country. And today, you might say it is a cultural mixture of these belief systems much more societally than they are religiously. But what both have in common is a deep reverence for the natural world, especially mountains. Perhaps the most famous example, Mount Fuji, is revered as a god, or kami itself, with a Shinto shrine at its summit. However, a major distinction in these systems is related to death and attachment. Unlike Buddhism, which sees the soul as superior and bodies as temporary vessels cycling to alleviate suffering, Shintoism views the dead as never truly gone, just watching and influencing. This creates an obligation of the living who must honor ancestors and ancestors who offer protection. While this sounds beautiful, both can be watered down to two negatives. In Buddhism, attachment is a rejection of the impermanence of life, and as such should be controlled, should it become something your soul craves so much it prevents you from moving on. In Shintoism, death is a source of kegare, or impurity. This is not a moral judgment of evil, but a physical and spiritual pollution that disrupts the natural order, which caused many in Japanese society connected with the dead, morticians, butchers, recently bereaved, to be seen as too unclean to associate with. And for centuries, the village in which the series takes place tasked the something in the mountain that is the new Hikaru to contain all of their kegare. By its own admission, the something had no component of individuality before the village began treating it like a wish-granting god, forcing it to become what they needed to keep them safe from distorted spirits called impurities, a phrase that directly translates to Shintoism's kegare. Of course, in the series, the impurities are literal. They do watch, drawn to emotion, to attachments like those of Yoshiki, whose desire to be loved and seen mutates from a natural longing for his deceased loved one to a destructive enmeshment that traps the new Hikaru with him on their own little mountain, ensuring they remain within their monster forms. Don't get me wrong, new Hikaru is all kinds of messed up too. His nature is to both want and be wanted, to consume and to give with devastating consequences. Both protagonists kind of share this desire. Yoshiki reaches inside Hikaru, literally and metaphorically showing the intimacy of merging, but this clinginess is fueled by grief. Grief where there is no resolution is the hardest of all. Yoshiki, his friends, the townspeople never got to grieve Hikaru because he's still there. Sometimes dead is better, but only if you're willing to accept that death happened at all. This is what Pet Sematary understood. Holding on doesn't curse the dead, it curses the living who refuse to let go. New Hikaru too just wants to consume Yoshiki, keep him forever. His nature to fill that hole inside him seems to emerge from grief. Grief over slowly understanding he isn't a person and is dangerous to those he cares about. Personally, I feel like the dynamic between new Hikaru and Yoshiki ties tightly into the differences between Buddhism and Shintoism. Buddhism would have Yoshiki let go and stop feeling sad. Shintoism would have him honor Hikaru while living with the loss. His rejection of both is a character flaw, but it also shows how deeply he wants to escape his culture, even if he can't admit it out loud. Yoshiki detaches from the old Hikaru when he accepts the new Hikaru not being human, but he's stuck, normalizing the something with its craving for his soul and seeing it as a tool to make himself feel better, even when the tool itself expresses a desire for autonomy. Because for Yoshiki to accept something undead or other is good enough. But this perpetuation of grief didn't start with the pair of them. The village began the belief that grief can feed gods, that fear sustains pointless rituals, and at the center of it all is the something, the being that became whatever the village needed, absorbing every ounce of blame and responsibility they refused to carry themselves. To understand why Yoshiki's love became undead, we need to understand how his village created a monster long before new Hikaru ever came down from that mountain. If stories of the sentient undead show us anything, it is, like Frankenstein and his monster, a matter of ambition and self-preservation. Most would agree the monster was evil, however, the moral is he was innocent when born. Its creator messed up by giving birth to an unstable, unnatural being and then abandoning it, a choice that led to the death of his younger brother, his love, and eventually himself. In the case of the Summer Hikaru Died, there isn't one creator, and when new Hikaru and Yoshiki research the village's god, Nonuki-sama, it leads them to uncover the truth of the something's Frankenstein identity. Their first discovery was that even the map of the villages together resembles a human body, an area that, before it was divided, faced famine, plague, and mass deaths. Frequent mercury mining brought wealth, so people kept settling despite, as world history shows, mercury fucks everything up. Many thought messing with the land would cause bad things, but at first this was purely superstition taken from science. And as the mercury dwindled, they started using it to create medicine called uronuki, a medicine to reduce the birth rate during famine and disease. Colloquially, they called it returning to Unuki-san of the mountain. This is where it became less science-based. A hole to the world of the non-living had opened in the mountain, and children were actually sent inside to sew it closed as a deliberate sacrifice, returning the children to the mountain upon which's mercury the parents depended for survival. Over time, Unuki-san became worshipped as the deity Nonuki-sama. There's no clear explanation for these holes dotted around the area, but likely so many people dying, mercury poisoning, starvation, or disease, created a hole in the membrane between worlds. Too many souls at once forming places where the impurities and even the something emerged. The worship of the something as Nonuki-sama actually came from a lie. A farmer who killed another got the head stuck in one of the holes, then claimed the dead man's possessions were a divine reward. So the village started believing heads could buy wishes. The people, fearing the unknown, offered heads of the weak and sick. They split the bodies apart and buried them across the region, turning the land itself into a human effigy. But these actions only made them murderers, because ultimately the land had been poisoned by the people mining, and the sacrifices, it turns out, according to Tanaka, were to a fake god. Except the something in the mountain wasn't entirely fake. And an Indo family member, one of Hikaru's ancestors, brought the head of his wife, Hichi, recently dead from plague, to the mountain and offered it to Nonuki-sama, using the object of his wish to bargain. So the something gave him exactly what he wanted. Hichi came back as a severed head. She suffered and died that same night when a third of the village died in bizarre ways, all involving the head or neck. Even now, all of the impurities, souls of past residents, look abnormal from the neck up. Afterwards, the harvest improved, the plague stopped. The village elders decided the Indo family's sin was responsible for both. So they created a ritual. Every 5 years, an Indo man would offer Hichi's petrified head as an apology, believing this would keep the village safe. When Yoshiki and New Hikaru discover the okubi, wooden heads carved to represent the sacrifice, New Hikaru is disturbed, realizing what the village did, using him as an excuse. The something that took over Hikaru's body isn't a god, it isn't even an impurity. It's a spawn, an illegitimate, a childlike being with no identity until humans gave it one. Its core drive is very simple. Do you want me? Granting the Indo's wish was the something giving into its nature to grant human wishes. Wishes with consequences that are the fallout of villagers meddling with powers they seek not to understand, but control. Hikaru's father, Kohei, knew the ritual was pointless. He argued with the village elders to let it end with him, but as in any rural area, and especially in Japan, there was a hierarchy to be respected. The elders forced Kohei to keep performing the ritual, and their dislike of his disagreement may have actually killed him. With his father's passing, Hikaru then became the only living Indo man. Still a teenager, but expected to take over for his father. A young person forced into a cookie-cutter replacement role for other people's sake is heartbreaking and a bit too realistic. Even harder when this ritual really was pointless and the kid died because of it. The old Hikaru, dying on the mountain like his ancestor, made a wish to the something to make sure Yoshiki and his loved ones wouldn't be alone. So it became the new Hikaru and came down in his form, which caused all of the impurities to follow it into the village. All of the horrible events in the series are the consequences of forcing the something, just like Hikaru, into a shape for someone else's benefit. Now, in Season 1's conclusion, the elders learned the fake god truth from Tanaka, so would the village accept the ritual was a lie? Would they let the new Hikaru leave? Very unlikely. The village will never let the something be free because the validity of the ritual isn't what's important to them, it's societal harmony and peace of mind. This comes back to kegare, as it is regarded as inherited in Shintoism. The Indo family was wholly marked as polluted, like those deemed unclean for their association with death. Yoshiki's association with the new Hikaru has claimed him too. He's mixed, the mark on his skin getting steadily darker. When a person's entangled, impurities swarm them. The boundary between worlds blurred, all they want to do is get closer. And actually, in real Japanese folklore, many human souls are bound by emotions so strong they warp into monsters, making unspoken grudges force them to suffer as outcasts even in death. This is what Buddhism warns against, attachment so strong it prevents rest, both for the dead and the living. It traces back to another aspect of Shintoism, wa. Within Japanese society, ego death, dissolution of self for the group, is really basic manners. Putting others over your superficial needs isn't inherently bad, but when it prioritizes surface peace at the cost of inner turmoil, that is where the corruption lies. For Yoshiki, his family and friends are good people, so why does he struggle so much? Well, because he senses what isn't on the surface. They accept a version of him that takes medicine to sleep, who's grown out his bangs to avoid eye contact, who can't engage in conversation. But would they accept another version? One that doesn't fit their desire for everything to be so easily understood without confrontation? Well, society demands harmony by controlling perception. And in Shintoism, those bonds between family, friends, whoever, they define us because they are cosmic threads holding existence together. This places the question, should Yoshiki and New Hikaru's bond exist on an existential level? Because they are two beings from different planes of existence whose enmeshment might decide the fate of humanity itself. But love at this scale is a force that Frankensteins others into what we need. The village's love created Nonuki-sama, the divine scapegoat. Hikaru's love created New Hikaru, something that took a dead boy's place. Yoshiki's love maintains New Hikaru, a monster who gives him comfort. Which brings us to the monster itself. What is Yoshiki forcing it to become? And for that matter, what does the new Hikaru want to be? To understand New Hikaru, we must look at him from two angles. What defines moral goodness, and what makes people themselves anyway? First, I'd like to bring in a somewhat similar character, Puella Maji Madoka Magica's Kyubey. This seemingly innocent anime is much darker than it seems, and not in the gore-fest sacrificing plot for Shockwave. It follows a young girl who's offered a wish by the adorable Kyubey in exchange for becoming a magical girl, unknowingly leading her and her friends down a path to becoming the very dark forces they are to eliminate. Similar to the Summer Hikaru Died something from the mountain, it is a massive matter of debate if Kyubey is evil. We learn the wishes Kyubey grants will prevent the death of the universe, but this is done by turning magical girls evil and collecting the energy released by their despair. He, like the new Hikaru's desire to consume human souls, is evil from a human perspective. Now, if we're talking objectively evil, that's a loaded question. Cockroaches in the context of human homes are to be exterminated without a second thought. Kyubey's kind are the same thing on a planet level. They can't perceive that their actions are evil as much as roaches can't perceive that they are spreading disease. It isn't that Kyubey refuses to understand human morals, it is that his version of moral goodness comes from hard logic. If the universe dies, that's bad is bad. Killing magical girls prevents this, so ergo killing magical girls is a permissible cost. New Hikaru himself says that humans are complicated. He doesn't understand what hurt is, or get what things like love, friendship, and family really mean. His primary motivations at the start of the series are to enjoy his time with old Hikaru's wish for him to be Yoshiki's companion, and to eliminate anyone who could reveal his existence. Torn between his craving for Yoshiki's soul, the old Hikaru's wish, and the enjoyment of his human life, his trouble deciding shows he isn't like Kyubey at all. He's developing empathy. Asuko's near death, where she confronts him about not being the real Hikaru, shows he understands Yoshiki's rage and even says he realized if Asuko died, it would be sad. New Hikaru comes to realize if he stays, he will end up devouring his friends, especially Yoshiki. But if he goes back to the mountain, perhaps everything will go back to normal. This extent of consideration is a leap forward in his perception of mortality and the value of life. It shows his bonds with others are starting to mean something. After all, everything new Hikaru experiences is his first. A movie the original saw 5 times moves him to tears. He's more of a cat person. He has a favorite type of ice cream. He makes a genuine effort to appeal to Yoshiki that he is his own being. He recognizes the personality and body aren't his. He tells Asuko the Hikaru she knew is a corpse, but he expresses regret for allowing it to be covered in scars. To answer whether he's becoming his own person, we really have to go back to the question, what makes people themselves? And look at New Hikaru within the ship of Theseus paradox. This describes the legendary ship of the hero Theseus, which was preserved for centuries in Athens by slowly replacing decaying planks until nothing of the original remained except in name. If New Hikaru has the same memories, face, and mannerisms, is it a copy of the original or a new thing entirely? In a sense, he is Hikaru. It is just as likely the things that define the new version of him as a separate entity could have naturally occurred within the old one because we ourselves are ever-changing. Not to mention the new one claims he hungers to fill the emptiness inside him, but like mortality, he couldn't have understood the concept without first recognizing what others have that he lacks. So which is it? Is it the planks or the name that make the ship? Well, probably neither. It is the journey and the stories, just like those the new Hikaru is taking of self-discovery. But Yoshiki, no matter how hard he denies it, he isn't accepting this. He asks why the new Hikaru thinks he can just throw aside this body whenever he wants. Accepting that he has no choice means the original Hikaru is actually dead. Which brings me back to Kyubey. Kyubey can't learn or change. He'll operate on alien logic forever. New Hikaru is learning empathy, developing preferences, and recognizing his own emptiness. He is not the same, but Yoshiki treats him like he is. Like a thing that operates on logic, Yoshiki can rationalize to get what he wants, like something that will never be human enough to deserve autonomy. Yet when Yoshiki begs New Hikaru to stay, we remember that he is the something. For the something cannot deny that request, because his hard logic is to hunger after being wanted. He tells Yoshiki he loves him. Not in a romantic way, not in a platonic way either. It's probably beyond the scope of human emotions. I don't want to get morbid, but it immediately reminded me of one of my favorite books, A Certain Hunger, which tells the story of a woman who is addicted to eating her lover so they remain with her forever. It pushes the idea that the desire to incorporate someone you love into yourself is a twisted way of making sure they can never leave you. The issue then of which becomes which version of this Hikaru will win? The one experiencing self-discovery or the monster that is the something? But that question assumes new Hikaru gets to decide, which he doesn't. Yoshiki says new Hikaru doesn't have to be human, that it's fine. He normalizes the entanglement between them in a way that is bound to cycle. First, Yoshiki applies human morals to new Hikaru who's like a child, unable to understand why he hurts people. Then he tries to reject new Hikaru, attacking the reflection of his own monstrousness. Then he traps new Hikaru within the monster role to validate his need to not be alone. Every time new Hikaru tries to develop himself, Yoshiki shuts it down. The choir competition, Hikaru genuinely seems sad missing, talking about the new and old Hikaru differences and his decision to return to the mountain. This is like samsara, the Buddhist cycle of suffering. Yoshiki applies human morals, rejects what he sees, then traps new Hikaru in the monster. He can't break free from the cycle because he refuses to let go. Once Yoshiki's on the way to understanding what Nonuki-sama is, he's actually opening up to his family. He seems more carefree. The new Hikaru has become a refuge for Yoshiki's monstrousness, so Yoshiki cannot let him go if he wants to keep showing the positive parts of himself to others. And we understand soon that the new Hikaru is actually better for Yoshiki's needs than the old one ever was. What new Hikaru provides is so much deeper than whatever crush Yoshiki had on his best friend. He provides proof that Yoshiki isn't the worst thing in the room. If Yoshiki admits he's a monster, but new Hikaru is learning to be human, then Yoshiki loses the one thing making him feel good about himself. In this way, the series' use of body horror speaks to both of them. It symbolizes people who experience their own bodies or identity as alien or wrong by default. This is important for understanding new Hikaru and Yoshiki's dynamic because of the disassociation formed between what we sense we are versus what we are forced to be. Authentic love requires independence. One's identity must stand on its own without the other person or you will crumble. And I won't put this all on Yoshiki either, even though it might seem like it. New Hikaru says he cannot function without Yoshiki. He clings to him like a child to a mother. As for Yoshiki, new Hikaru has tried to kill him so many times it hardly matters by the time he begs him to stay. Both are ready to destroy themselves for this attachment. But neither has asked the question that could actually free them. What if love doesn't have to look like anything we recognize? I've been skating around it, so let's make it clear. Yoshiki is gay. I avoided saying it because many were angry that, unlike the one-off manga it is based on, the series doesn't place the protagonist as a couple. Don't get me wrong, it is a queer story, just not explicitly a romance. This change has had a lot of people discounting the story's quality and authenticity when whether or not Yoshiki is willing to engage in a romantic relationship with an otherworldly monster in the body of his dead best friend is honestly the least interesting thing about the Summer Hikaru Died. As someone who's experienced depersonalization, the obscure love between Yoshiki and new Hikaru presents identity and intimacy in a way that most series shy away from. Sex sells, as the bloated romantasy market shows, but love is so much more than that. And I don't mean in a prudish, leave space for Jesus kind of way. Queer baiting is a harmful marketing tactic that has no place in good stories. But the Summer Hikaru Died frames the story as queer regardless if it's about sexuality. It's about culturally induced outsiderness, inability to conform, and a need for individuality that isn't about slapping on a label for the convenience of others who seek easy answers to complicated questions. Non-romantic, non-platonic bonds often feel threatening to many people, which is why new Hikaru is portrayed as a monster. In the scenes where new Hikaru succumbs to his craving for Yoshiki's soul, the way Hikaru latches onto Yoshiki is rendered as something grotesque, alien, and horrifying. But the horror aesthetic doesn't reflect what new Hikaru is. Rather, how queerness is so often seen as something predatory or unnatural. This is the lens that homophobia uses, distorting what might otherwise be intimate, even comforting. Yoshiki's initial reaction is a direct expression of internalized fear and disgust, but as the scene unfolds, he begins to feel warmth, pleasure, a connection. That shift shows his fear is unfounded. The moment Yoshiki allows himself to feel recognition instead of fear, that illusion collapses. Because the environment in which he's been raised defines what is right and wrong, human and monster. The struggle to understand yourself is hard enough without imposing strict rules that make you evil for just trying to exist. French philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre coined the phrase "hell is other people," meaning our eternal torment comes from an inability to escape each other's judgment and the constant need for external validation. Life in a village within the series is just like that. The moment something you consider scandalous happens, it scars you like a deep wound. It doesn't matter who you were before, and everyone makes such a big deal about it, not because they genuinely care, but because they feel the need to gossip. So Yoshiki ends up seeking intimacy where judgment can't reach. The times Yoshiki reaches inside of new Hikaru's void, it is clearly erotic. An issue with this is that the new Hikaru in its most basic form cannot give Yoshiki love, physical or not, in the way he wants it. The something willingly weakened itself to prove to Yoshiki that he could trust it, and its denied nature to consume Yoshiki's soul mixes with its human feelings of guilt, causing new Hikaru to grow progressively more unstable. New Hikaru confesses he doesn't know if these are the old Hikaru's feelings or his own, but he knows one thing for certain. He loves Yoshiki, and it hurts to see Yoshiki afraid of him. Because love beyond the romantic is still love. What's important about this series is that Yoshiki and new Hikaru have their own thing. They don't have to follow common rules, and if we want to glean a deeper meaning from the story, we shouldn't impose those expectations on them either. The healthiest path for them is to acknowledge that they aren't a human teaching a monster, but are co-creating themselves. As Yoshiki says, instead of making yourself blend in, maybe you could find a place where you can be yourself. You are the sole author of your life. There's no predetermined right way to love or be human. Although, realistically, the collapse of person and monster boundaries between the main pair means they reject their current path can only lead to destruction. If new Hikaru left the village, impurities would be drawn to him. How would he even function around millions of people? Part of the reason Yoshiki is being like he is because of new Hikaru's influence. But what about the other way around? Is new Hikaru changing because it's really developing, or because it is melding its identity to what is needed of him? Would he ever become human enough to no longer be a threat? These are the questions I can't answer. Love can dissolve categories, but it should also evolve into new ones. We see it in the molting cicada. If Yoshiki accepted Hikaru is gone, he could emerge as a better version of himself. Yet he'd rather just shove it back in its shell and go on as things were before, no matter what horror is contained inside. But this series' horror gives away to something much more mortal because sometimes dead is better. Not because death is preferable, but because clinging to what's gone and Frankensteining it to fit your needs turns love necrotic. Many of us stop living before we even die. We trap ourselves on mountains, we put the cicada back. As I have said, Buddhism teaches us to accept impermanence. Shintoism teaches us to honor what was. And what we should take from both of them is that we have to accept that all things have an end, but we should not fear losing them. Because we are not ships. We are not collections of planks that can be replaced until nothing original remains. We can hold them all, those new and pristine or those molded and withered by time. We become something new while carrying what we are. New Hikaru made his choice the moment he fell in love with a song. Even if that glow from the past fails to reignite toward the future this pounding in my heart. Maybe it's just new Hikaru experiencing a life that has but one chance. Or it might be a message buried in the old Hikaru's memories for Yoshiki. Either way, the song asks them to keep chasing onward, because we all need to decide what kind of future we consider to be living, and if our attachments are a monster that devours us or a companion we walk beside, and that we need to accept that love, real love, doesn't have to look like anything we recognize to be worth keeping alive. If you made it this far, thanks for exploring what happens when the past refuses to die. And when you're trapped on your own mountain, clinging to what's gone, ditto. That's why I'm pickle ditto, because whatever storytelling pickle you're in, I've probably been there too.